Welcome to all of you for the inaugural keynote of the India Conference at Harvard 2021. My name is Heer Joisher. I'm a PhD student at the Harvard Medical School, and I'm a co-chair of the conference this year. I am super excited to kick off this conference with one of the most accomplished actors in our times, Richa Chadha. Having etched memorable on-screen characters such as Bholi Panjaban in Fukre and Fukre Returns, Nagma Khatun in Gangs of Wasseypur 1 and 2, Devi in Masan, Zarina Malik from Inside Edge, and many more, Richa has truly paved her success on her own terms. Her largest feature film, her latest feature film, Madam Chief Secretary, also released in cinemas recently to widespread acclaim. She's currently working on season 3 of Inside Edge and will soon begin working on the hit franchise Fukre 3. We are so excited to have Richa speak today about her journey in Bollywood and also about the issues that are closest to her heart. Thank you again for joining us, Richa. This session will also be moderated by Akshay Marathe, a first-year student of Harvard Kennedy School and also a co-chair of the India Conference. So without further delay, I'm excited to kick off the India Conference at Harvard 2021 by welcoming Richa and Akshay.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Richa. Thank you so much, Heer, for starting us off. We're really excited to have Richa here. And before I actually begin, Richa, I wanted to plug your Harvard connection and your India Conference connection. You were saying that your brother was at the Harvard Medical School last year, and he's been a regular at the India Conference. So are you excited to be here?
I hope he's watching. I did send him a link. I'm quite excited because he did ask me in the past when the conference was obviously in person, not virtual. But I'm really excited to be here. I love talking to people.
Awesome. We're also really happy to have you. And let's start off the conversation by, I think, starting with your career and how it started. You've been in the industry for more than 14 years now. And I think the one thing a lot of us think about Richa Chadha is that you've had a most unusual path to stardom. You've made unconventional film choices right from day one. I think Oi Lucky Lucky Oi was your first big break where you played Dolly. What inspired you to take this road not taken? How has this journey been?
So I've not been here for 14 years. My big break came with Gangs of Wasseypur. Before that, I moved back to Delhi after doing Oye Lucky Lucky Oye, which I got because somebody spotted me in a play, in a theater production, and decided to audition me for this part of Dolly. And I got it through that audition, through that play. But I mean, for me, doors really started opening only after 2012 when Gangs of Wasseypur released, which went on to become a really big hit and became like a cult film. So yeah, I mean, I've been around for that long, but uh, I mean, these are really unconventional choices in retrospect. But when I came into the industry, uh, I didn't know it to be the kind of sort of typical close-minded space that it was, at least at that time. So I didn't think I was doing risky parts. I thought I was doing great parts. I thought that anybody would kill to do these parts, but obviously our structure, the way the ecosystem is structured, is very different. And so yeah, they in retrospect they seem very very risky. Those parts, yeah.
Richa,
Sorry
we're
to
getting
nudge
some.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to nudge in, Richa. Just the audio is a little low, so if you could speak closer to the mic, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, in that context, I remember watching this interview of yours where you were saying that after Gangs of Wasseypur, you got offered the role of playing Hrithik Roshan's mother because you played Nagma Khatun in that film. And personally, it was like one of my favorite roles that you played. So how was that post Gangs experience dealing with film offers?
This is actually during Gangs of Wasseypur when I got offered this weird part and I remember I called the casting director who I had auditioned for something else. I said, I think somebody in the office has made a mistake or have been really lazy because I'm 24 years old and I can't retract my birth and suddenly, so yeah, I mean, they seem to get it, but it wasn't easy. I thought it was really ridiculous. And I thought that this is the way our industry operates. Now it makes sense that, women in the past or, somebody who played a cop would play a cop in 70 different films back to back in the 60s and 70s. And yeah, I mean, it made me understand the reality of the film industry quite early on.
And I'm just curious, you've played really strong women characters. You played Dolly, you played Nagma Khatun, played Devi in Masan. And then now the last film you did was Madam Chief Minister, also a very strong character. I think all your women characters have broken the stereotype about what it means to be an Adarsh Bharatiya Nari. And films do shape our society. So, how satisfying was it for you to contribute to that process of challenging patriarchy? What was that experience like?
Honestly, like I said, coming from the school and the college and the family that I was coming from, I didn't think that I was doing anything out of the ordinary because I had seen these films. I had seen growing up when my mother made sure that I would watch films that Sham Benegal made or Abdul Gopalakrishnan made. Of course, I watched my regular Bollywood, the Govinda films that were hit uh, during the 90s. But I honestly didn't think I was doing anything out of the ordinary because I thought we have to chase after these good parts. We have to chase after um, like meaningful parts, parts that will outlast your youth and your beauty, and that actually means something. They actually say something. So, I mean, I'm really happy that they have ended up challenging patriarchy. But I thought it was a given that everybody will challenge patriarchy, so it's a kind of a rude jolt a few years on into the film business when you realize not everybody has the same uh, I think a worldview as you do.
Right. Richa, we're still getting feedback from our viewers that if you can speak up a little bit, it might be better for everyone to hear you.
Okay.
Perfect. I know it's really early morning in India right now, and I know it's early day, early start.
It's fine. It's not that early.
Okay, then I guess let's try to be a little bit louder so people can hear the conversation a little better.
Yeah.
I think in the context of Madam Chief Minister, I wanted to talk to you about this. There was a controversy about the poster of the film, right? There was a picture of you in ragged clothes, wielding a broom. A lot of people felt like it was insensitive to the really strong Dalit leaders that India has had, who have tried to break that stereotype by dressing up in a way that takes them out of that image. And then the producers had to pull out that poster, and there was some backlash against it. How do you see that entire incident? How do you evaluate it? What was your takeaway from that in terms of representation in Indian cinema?
See, there are two issues here. One was the poster itself, which was kind of objectionable, um, and uh, and the second issue is representation. So let's get to them one by one. um, when when see as actors we get the posters only a few hours before they're due to be released. For me, that was a scene from the film where this character gets beaten up and is brutalized, and her she has to fight off a whole bunch of men. Hence, her clothes are torn and dirty, and then she goes and seeks refuge in her master ji, her mentor's house, and starts to live there and starts to become a student leader. um, and uh, and the broom for me was a prop. Obviously, if we had all had time and had sent it to people or had somebody from the DBA background in our marketing team, this error wouldn't have happened. Immediately as the poster released, uh, I just forwarded it, the copy and whatever, posted, and I saw the first few reactions, and I looked closely and I was like, oh, we made a huge mistake. And then I remember I kept trying to talk to my director, who was obviously very upset at this oversight. He's like, I can't believe that this happened, and I'm so wrong here, and this is an error on my part. And, so I put out a statement for it because I think that that's something that should have been done immediately. it is objectionable and offensive. Um, and this is just how the industry is. We don't have enough people who can correct us and tell us time and again. We don't have enough people who actually even assert their Dalit identity. Which brings me to the second point of representation. I know I got a lot of flack for it, and it seemed to me a little bit unfair that I was the only one who got flack for it because I didn't design the posters. Actors don't do that. I don't we don't cast the film, we don't write the film. It just seemed to me like nobody. Um, and I have done a film like Masan, where Vicky was playing this Dalit character. And when I asked why, how come there was no outrage, at that time people said that that project was helmed by a Dalit filmmaker. However, none of them knew that he was Dalit because he didn't come out as Dalit for at least 2 years after the film release. So, I feel like sometimes a lot of meaningful conversations get lost in the place, in a place like Twitter, where a lot of people are fighting for online cred. I'm the first one to take it on the chin and receive feedback and valid criticism, but the only thing I kept saying was that this is misdirected. And of course, I am the face of it, but you don't know the other things we do to sort of get this film made. Like in an ideal world, this part should have been played by a Dalit actor. In an ideal world, you know, casting decisions would not be influenced by uh, who has how many followers on Instagram. But these things don't happen. So the only point I was trying to put forth very gently was that this this discussion, I mean, as an artist, I thought it was imperative for me to mainstreamize a story like this. This was still a somewhat commercial film. It was not a film that was going to festivals. It was not a film that was um, uh, that had a sort of very unknown cast and crew. It had a filmmaker who had previously made a 100 crore film with an Akshay Kumar type of mainstream hero. So for me, mm, I would much rather a story like this be told than it not being made at all. Because I knew that some of their other casting choices were people who could not even speak Hindi properly. So I am doing my best in my own capacity. Sometimes I mean, I think the criticism is valid, and most times I think like a lot of this criticism that came my way was, of course, misdirected, but also was like kind of vicious sort of liberal bullying that happens with where people are scampering to get some kind of vote there. I mean, but in my head, I'm like, I went and I barely charged any money for this film. I almost did it for free because I wanted the film to be made. I wanted this topic to come out. I wanted a conversation to be sparked. I wanted people to discuss it. And I mean, and there's only so much attention I'll pay to somebody who's just sitting and tweeting because I think calling out has become a very easy thing to do. Oh, I called somebody out. It's like I've absolved of all responsibility in this matter because I have called you out, and hence I feel better about myself. So I mean, I took a lot of that feedback very seriously. I've worked that into the kind of activism I do or the behind the scenes work I do. But I mean, from a film point of view, I thought that people who were upset, and they were right to be upset, were not perhaps aware of the way in which the film industry works.
No, I mean, I'll be honest. I do think people should cut you some slack because you have been incredibly brave when it comes to taking stands. You have really stuck your neck out for things you believe in, and you've been kind of an activist actor in a lot of ways. In that vein, I wanted to ask you, what is it like to be a Bollywood actor who's vocal? What is it? Are there any structural barriers that you think exist for other actors who don't do the same thing? Why do you think there is that difference between a Richa Chadda versus anybody else who's not going to take a stand when it matters?
I think the primary difference is in the people that we are. Um, you have to understand a lot of people who work in the film industry are, are from the film industry. So they've had family in the film industry, they've been brought up here. More or less, if they're living in a bubble, They may not even be aware. Like currently, I mean, this they will be aware that a rape happened in Hathras. They will be aware that it was gruesome and the investigation was not really up to the mark and there was a forcible cremation. But will they be aware that there was a Rohit Vemula or a Khair Lanji or now a Hathras where the role of caste is seeking to be, you're trying to deny it altogether. They may not be aware. So I mean, like, if you don't know, um, then you don't know. I mean, then there's not so much. I mean, there's just a, a really different bunch of people. You've seen superstar Bollywood vibes, right? So there's a very different world in which, like, there are all these other ecosystems. There are all these new filmmakers. There are all these people, like, there are all these people who want to jump JNU and come and become actors like Swara or things like that. But I mean, this is the reality. There's also like a whole bunch of people for whom this is like a Friday is a Friday, and there has to be a song and a launch and all that. It's not so much about apathy as it is about ignorance, I think. And then and then obviously in the current climate, it's been a little bit harder for everybody to speak up, and that's plain to see.
Exactly. And I feel like I'm sure your publicist and your PR person also may sometimes tell you, okay, you're crossing a line there. Maybe that's not the best way to, speak your mind. Uh, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that kind of people around you trying to tell you that don't say these things on Twitter or don't say these things on an interview? How do you deal with that pressure?
I I don't take the pressure. I mean, I don't see it as pressure. I just think that uh, I mean, most of them have gotten used to me. Like the publicist that I've worked with, have worked with him for the past 4 or 5 years. So he kind of understands who I am, where I come from. And the thing is, sadly, most people agree with you, but they just don't want you to have these opinions go public. So I think they get it now. Um, yeah, I, I mean, I don't think any of them hate me, but they're more like exasperated. Like, why do you have to do this? And but it's very hard. I mean, as much as you're saying that happened to you, if you know that, if you know what's going on, if you're reading the newspaper, I mean the right newspaper, and uh, it's hard to speak up, but it's really hard not to speak up. It's like ignoring something that's in your face. And as people who have a stake in how who are not 60 and 70 and are just sort of waiting for the tide to pass and are saying, oh, this is a circle and this is cyclical hatred and all, then it really hurts. You want things to get better. So yeah.
Absolutely. I was also thinking about how in recent times you've seen the government in India kind of try to regulate OTT platforms. And you have been somebody who's leveraged OTT really well. Like you were one of the first movers from the big league to kind of make that transition. You did Inside Edge. People have earlier kind of questioned your decision to do that. But today, OTT is a completely mainstream platform. Every big actor out there is doing OTT. In this context, when you see that there is regulation happening of OTT, how do you think people are going to react to it? There is one part of it which is the curtailment of civil liberties and people's right to speak, but on the other hand, the whole OTT business model is that the audience wants a certain kind of content, and the government is going to come in and say, okay, you can't do this and you can't do that. How do you think the audience is going to react to it? What do you think is going to happen in this?
See, I don't know. I can't speak for the audience. I mean, a few things have happened in the last year. We've had a whole captive audience in the lockdown, in the absence of cinema halls, in the absence of uh, having a lot of avenues for entertainment. We found a captive audience that is hooked onto your Amazon Prime and your Netflix and everything because they're at home and they're locked down. The other thing that has been happening for the past few years is the declining footfalls in the cinema halls, and that is something which I think everybody should pay very close attention to, because that means that either the ticket prices are very unaffordable, which they are, And the government has been trying to do some things like lower the GST, but I don't think that's enough. I think we need more of an incentive to flourish as a film business. I don't think cinema is going anywhere, but with this new regulation that is now being discussed and whatever, I mean, what we've seen in the past is um, people taking a lot of offense to a web show. Sometimes they've not seen the show. People taking offense to a joke, or so I just think that there's so many things to be offended by in reality. When you just open the newspaper and you see what's going on, there's plenty of things you can get offended by and actually be outraged about and do something about. Organize, resist, instead of fiction TV. So, I mean, I don't really care for that offense part, but I'll tell you that the this is very, I mean, this is just to create an atmosphere of some kind of fear. This is fear mongering where people are like, I was shocked to read the Supreme Court say, or I mean, I don't know if it was a Supreme Court or some court say that the actor knew that the lines he was reading, and hence this is fair game in reference to, I think, Zishan Ayub. Now, I haven't seen that show, but this is a very dangerous precedent because we can actually dig up graves and then question people about their choices. I mean, is the court saying that, like Amrish Puri was Mogambo and he was an anti-national icon, or I don't know, Prem Chopra is a rapist, or what? I mean, we're actors. We're doing our job as people who are putting something out into the environment, and this kind of, I think, the other thing I think is very counterproductive. The minute something becomes controversial, more people want to see it. So inadvertently, they end up giving more publicity to something they think is objectionable or shouldn't be viewed instead of actually having people not see it. But I'll tell you this from in the, I'm sure in the boardrooms at like the big corporate offices of these big OTT platforms, there's already a lot of fear and a lot of self censorship that happen. They don't want to touch political things. We know that everything is political, but they don't want to touch these subjects anymore. They don't want to uh, openly go out there and promote them. So, I mean, I think that it's very sad, but this will only end up with a lot of self censorship.
Yeah, and that would be I think detrimental to the audience also, given that that's what they moved from a big screen to the small screen because they want to see fresh content. um I think I don't want to go on with my own questions. There are a lot of people who have tuned in, but one last thing that I'll ask you that I had thought you might want to speak about. We're in the US right now. We're students of the Harvard Kennedy School and the Harvard Business School who organize this conference. And we organize this conference because we do love our country. We really love India. We want to talk about India, what holds in the future. And in that context, I feel like it, I'm sure you love India also. You're a patriotic person. What is your message for the youth of India right now, for people who are at Harvard right now, who are watching from the US right now? What is it that you want to kind of leave people with? What is that one thing?
I think that the only thing that we should be focusing on is the climate. Honestly, it will not matter if you're Hindu or Muslim or if you're voting for Congress or BJP. What's happening is very plain to see. I was shooting in Uttarakhand and we had to travel a whole lot to find a good thick patch of snow because snowfall was delayed. I'm in Delhi right now shooting, and there is a whole lot of smog outside my window. And this is something that will impact everyone and already does. This is connected to everything that's going on, including the farmers' movement, which is raging. And instead of focusing on priorities like this, we do not realize that we are living in a developing economy. All other metrics of what it means to be a civilized society or a growing society are already on the decline, whether it's things like press freedom or uh, healthcare. But now we've gone we've come to the real basics, not having clean drinking water, clean air to breathe. Whatever little progress we made has just seemed, I don't know, it's undone in the last few years, in the last decade or so. There's huge human wildlife conflict. There are Adivasis who are fighting to keep their land and their way of life in the middle of forest reserves and tiger sanctuaries. There's large scale mining. There is everything that can go wrong is already going wrong. If you live in Juhu, you can have traces of arsenic in your drinking water, and that's simply not something we deserve. I know culture, sabhyata, maryada, history, everything is important. But is it more important than clean air or clean drinking water? I'm not sure. So I feel like, uh, this tendency of human beings to sort of look away from the problem that's staring them in the face and cook up something that's completely irrational, something that you can fight about maybe even 50 years hence, um, is is very worrisome. And not to sound like an alarmist, but we don't really have more than a couple of decades to turn back the clock. Countries like India will be the most severely impacted because you have large coastlines, and we've been seeing the stuff that's been happening in Bombay, whereby portions of reclaimed coastline are sinking and such. So I do not understand why. I just honestly I feel like it's because most politicians are old and they think they'll be dead by the time climate change actually starts affecting them. So they think it's in the distance, but there's a whole bunch of people who are not even having children because they know that the earth is not fit for a new child to live in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there was a conversation we were having yesterday about subversion
Mm.
and how do you, if you were talk about climate change, how do you think we can subvert what's happening and fight for green energy, clean energy? How do you think we can actually contribute in that?
We have to go back to the basics. In India, in the past, in my grandmother's house, in everyone's house, there used to be a well, which was a de facto way of rainwater harvesting. They had other means to support, like everything that happened was symbiotic. The cattle would give your manure, you'll use it in the fields, you'll come back, you're in the clock with nature. But now, because it's a developing economy still, and now it's a severely impoverished one, I feel what's happening is people are tending to to confuse consumerism with actual development. So if you go into a remote corner in Telangana and Vidarbha, you might not find drinking water, but you'll find your soda. And that says a lot about the way that this kind of consumerism has infected the whole country. Uh, it's a major cause of pollution. It's a major cause of, I don't know. I really don't have answers, but I have lots of questions about uh, why we are not looking at this more seriously. We've had
Fair enough.
just last 2 weeks ago in Uttarakhand. I was in Uttarakhand at that time when in Garhwal there was a glacier burst. Now the glacier is going to burst because of the increasing temperatures. Now, in those sensitive belts, because of rampant construction, deforestation, there was plenty of landslides all over. Now there's a dam, then there's a glacier. I don't understand. I mean, how people can't see that this is going to affect their own selves, and how people can think that they're divorced from nature in some way.
Absolutely, fair enough. Richa, I was thinking we can take some audience questions now. We had a lot of questions coming in over the last 30 minutes, and some people have actually compiled them for us, and I have them right here. One question that somebody has asked here is, what do you want to tell people who want to make it in Bollywood? Should they focus on an approach that is more niche and offbeat, like how you started off, or is it just more easy for people to choose the more mainstream option? Is what do you think is better for a starting point in somebody's career?
I think eventually to get longevity in your career as a man or a woman, you have to be a part of good films. Now, whether you go into a Miss India pageant and start off there and get a big song and dance film, and then 5 years, 10 years down the line, you want to tell people you can act, and then you pick the niche projects with the cool Venice returned filmmakers, and you make those films. That's one way. Or you can audition, do theater, make your own group, and sort of go that way. I mean, it's not going to be easy either way. It's a very huge industry, but I tend to think that if you have talent, you will. I mean, if you have talent, you have patience, and not going to be easily bullied, then you can make it. So there, both these routes exist. The first one might give you more money in the beginning. Um, yeah, the first one might give you more money in the beginning. Then you can produce your own films, and people can even do television and make make sure that they're financially secure, and then go ahead and work in other offbeat or parallel films. But yeah, both these routes exist. I prefer the route that I took, simply because I mean, I didn't initially want to be in films that I couldn't even watch. So it depends on your choice. If you've grown up watching a lot of commercial films and this is what you want to do, and that's your dream, then go for it. But you must know that it's a difficult industry. There are lots of structural things that we need to change, like having insurance and royalty and some kind of protection, syndication for actors, creators in the film business. Um, so it's going to be very uphill and hard, right? But it's definitely worth a shot.
Thanks, Richa. I think on that note, there's another question about equal pay in Indian cinema. When do you think equal pay for men and women is going to be a reality?
Honestly, and could be an unpopular opinion, I think at least the Hindi film industry only rewards box office. So if you've had great box office, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you can make the money. Of course, you can't be competing with people who've been acting for 20, 30 years, who have their set audiences, who are now in their 50s, who are big producers, movie moguls. But honestly, this is not something that I have come across. And I've been a part of a lot of films which have more men than women, like whether it's Fukre or Gangs of Wasipur or whatever, I've either been paid at par or more or whatever. I can't disclose that. But I honestly feel like they only respect bums on seats. That's the thing. If you can get box office in, then you're good, whatever you do. And that is also changing now because of the cinema chains, because of Corona, because of people going straight to digital and watching prime content on the OTT platform. So even that is changing. I think this will sort of crumble and wither away on its own. I'm only speaking for the Hindi film industry, not for the South and other industries like Flash.
Right? Do you think that in the South it's do you think it's any different there? Do you think that's not box office driven as much as uh, Bollywood would be?
No. That is completely box office driven. But there are a few things that are very unique to the industries in the South. One is that they seem to have their ticketing right. They have a cap on how much. I mean, the like even a Rajnikant film, you will not spend more than $100 on. The culture is that of a lot of hero worship. A lot of their big male stars go on to become politicians and legendary politicians at that, like MGR and NTR and Jayalalitha. Uh, uh, However, I feel like it's very, I this is just my outsider opinion. When I see the big families, the big film families of the South, I feel like they're still very much about their own families, and you have heroines and villains imported from the north, but by and large, they're huge families like the Naga Chaitanya family or the Mammootty family. I mean, different industries, but they're really huge male stars with a pantheon of their own, like uncles and all, and doing good work, no doubt. But yeah, I think it's still very close for men to enter that. I mean, as major heroes.
Right. We'll just take a couple more questions. We have Ishita Borua asking the characters that you play on screen, how does it affect you in your real life? And I'll just add that another question to it. When you played the role of Madam Chief Minister, how did that impact your own life at that time?
Uh, I mean, a few films have had an impact on me. One was of course Masan, which was it was kind of repressing your own emotion and not. I mean, I'm such a fighter in real life, but that character, she was sort of gulping down all her uh, insults and sort of just trying to survive, trying to love her father and just get by. So that was a hard film for me. Then there was Love Sonia, which was a film about the human trafficking and sex trafficking of minors. That really had an impact on me because I had to do a lot of research and met a lot of commercial sex workers. I found out how they were abducted, how sometimes their fathers sold them into the trade, and how they would travel in a steel container from, like, say, Hong Kong to LA just to be able to sold off to just to be able to be sold off for their virginity to one prime Hollywood property. So those things really affected me. I tried to do something about them in terms of going out and helping people who are in the same actual situation. Uh, and when people say you're profiting off someone's misery, I just want them to know that uh, we aren't really profiting. Most of these films like these are made for little to no money. At least actors don't get paid that much because you have to make it for love, and the theme, the storyline is bigger than anybody else. But having said that, I think it would do everybody good to go back to the subject and look at it more closely and figure out how they can be more involved and just from the point of view of an artist to help out people who are actually in that situation. So yeah, these two, even with Madam Chief Minister, I mean, it was a really tough part. It's a feisty young student leader who has no sort of inhibitions and no idea that she's actually any less than anyone else because of her caste or her oppressed background or her gender. So yeah, I mean, I'm doing something. Even after that film, I realized that there was a lot of space for improvement in terms of even the work that I do. So I'm doing something with regard to that, which I think I'll make public next month.
Awesome. The top voted question right now is what are your thoughts? It's from Paras Desai. What are your thoughts on the openness of Indian actors in expressing political views vis-a-vis Hollywood actors? So, how do you compare the two?
I'll give you a very simple analogy. When the Me Too movement broke out in Hollywood, it was still not easy, right? You had all these actresses come out week after week about one of the most powerful people in the business. It was properly timed, it was well executed, it was organized, and it was still hard. It took some six Oscar winning actresses to be able to pin this man down and put him in jail. And that happened in a country like America with an active press and a judiciary. Now, when you compare that to something like India, where somebody who files a rape allegation at 9 a.m. in the morning can go missing from their house at 6 p.m., it's a very different scenario. I'm not defending any of the people from my fraternity. I'm certainly not saying that they're right in keeping quiet or they're wrong or whatever. But I'm just explaining to you, the context is so different. Here, you can be killed. You can be killed off in a road accident. You can stop getting work altogether. We don't have the luxuries that actors in the West do in terms of royalty. It's not that I can do one film and live off that royalty forever. I can do that one film, and we have actors who, like, brilliant actors who in their 60s and 70s have been putting out, GoFundMe things for to pay their medical bills during the pandemic. So um, America is what you should aspire to have here in terms of freedom. America is what you should hope that every artist has, where Meryl Streep can take on the sitting president and not be killed for it. Uh, Over here, it's really, I mean, I don't even think that people can uh, decline an invitation to, safely decline an invitation to go to a political event or a party. Some of us have, and we will continue to if they don't align with our principles. But it's really hard in the absence of any real independent mainstream media, in the absence of a judiciary that will stand up for you on your rights, barring pockets, like Allahabad High Court will say something, Bombay High Court will say something uh, to uphold the individual's freedom. But in other cases, it gets really hard. And then your case is dragging on for 20, 30, 40 years. Can you really blame them? I mean, I know a lot is expected of them, but I think that it's just an atmosphere of fear, and I get it. I get why they're quiet, and it's not like they were always quiet. If you remember, people used to speak. People did speak. People did take on the establishment. People did tweet about fuel prices and rising intolerance. And then what happened? We had union cabinet ministers sort of show off that look, we got this deal, we got this brand snatched away from that actor, or hoga wo hero apne ghar mein type. So yeah, you're dealing with that kind of sometimes you're dealing with plain hooliganism, that you're walking down the road and somebody's tearing up posters, setting fire to your effigy or your face, and smashing movie halls. And then it just gets really difficult in that scenario to actually take a stand and speak up, knowing that you can't fall back on royalty, knowing that you may not ever have work after this, and knowing that uh, the things that are supposed to protect you, like courts and the cops and things, are most definitely not going to be able to do that.
I think the feeling that people have is if Richa Chadda can do it, then why can't others do it, right?
Because Richa Chadda doesn't have 300 crores riding on her. The films I make are limited in liability. I don't have I don't have some mansion in Juhu which I have to pay EMIs for. I don't have kids that are studying in Harvard or Oxford that I have to pay through my nose for their fee. I don't have those liabilities. I feel very free to be able to do that, and it's by design. I mean, I want to do these films. I want to have freedom to express myself, uh, and I get it. I get, and it's not that the biggest superstars have spoken in the past, but they've been made to shut up. So that's something that we should know. That's something that we should. I'm not saying I'm defending them, but that's something that we should know and understand, that like kuch hai hi nahi. In the absence of any kind of security, it's very, very hard to speak up.
Right. So one final question, Richa, before we can let you go. This is about love jihad. I think there is so much being spoken about love jihad right now. People must be wondering why we are laughing when we're talking about something that's so serious. But to those who don't know, Richa is married, or has been with a wonderful human being and actor, Ali Fazal, and has been under attack from Twitter troll armies, especially in times right now in India when any kind of Hindu Muslim relationships are being seen in poor light. So, how has your experience been being in a love jihad relationship?
I It's a love relationship for me. There's no jihad at all. He's a wonderful, liberal, amazing, progressive person, more so than any other person that I've met or been with. And I think this is also manufactured controversy. It comes from a space of, like, the old, like Babu Banjarangi kind of thought process, whereby I'm not a woman that will be reduced to my home, where somebody can tell me you can't marry this person or you can't be with this person because your child will be this kind of evangelist stuff doesn't work for most women. And I think we are a country where Nargis and Sunil Dutt were celebrated as a couple. So I still belong to that country. I'm not going to fall for these ridiculous Twitter things that people keep doing, and they're bots. I mean, who cares what they have to say? And if it's someone who's actually human and who's not a bot, I'm really sad to say they don't know love in their life. Uh, and and it's also not surprising, because we are a country with so much honor killing, where we're still so much steeped in superstition. No matter what we say in English in this lovely webinar, I'm in Delhi, I can, drive down 20 minutes and I can be in the heart of Haryana where some Khap Panchayat in the past has ordered an honor killing between an intercaste couple. So this is a reality of our society, but I think that uh, love is something that one should be brave about, and not have to explain to anybody and not have to defend, definitely. So I'm very happy with my relationship. I i think a lot of people are happy with theirs also, even though they are not in the public eye. um, and it doesn't matter what people say, because I don't think a woman should be reduced to her reproductive choices, or her ability to bear an offspring. And that is what this is really about. It's a deeply misogynistic idea that a woman can't make her own decisions.
Thank you so much for saying that, Richa. I think this entire conversation has reminded us why we are such big fans of you. You have always spoken your mind and spoken for a lot of us who don't have platforms like yours to say what you do. It has been really, really amazing to have you. And even the hundreds of people who joined us are very grateful for your time. And we hope that you will come back to the India conference sometime in the next few years and speak with in person at the Harvard Kennedy School and the business school campuses.
I would love that. I would really love that. Thank you so much for this, and I had fun. I hope it was informative and we presented some opinions that you were not previously aware of. That's all.
Absolutely, it's that is always the case when people hear you speak, I think. So thank you so much. Before everybody else leaves, I just wanted to remind all of you that this is only day one of the India conference. We still have 2 more days to go. It's 10:50 p.m. On 19th February in the US right now, and it's early morning on 20th February in India. So if you're in India, then this evening we have a power pack lineup for you. Um, we have three panels happening simultaneously. If you look at this screen here, we have where should India's big bets in manufacturing be in the next 10 years with Lata Venkatesh, Gautam Kumbra, Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who's India's chief economic advisor, Rana Hassan, and Vani Kola. You also have a very interesting panel on caste in business. Our business is doing enough to have equitable caste representation. We have a power pack panel with Nitin Gadkari, the Union Minister in the Government of India, and we also have Shashi Tharoor speaking with him on the question of how do you improve the ease of doing business in India. We have the Chief Minister's Roundtable tomorrow with Suraj Yengde and the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, Mr. Hemant Soren. They will be speaking about a range of issues, including center-state relations, how it is to govern a state like Jharkhand in the times that we're living in. So we have a lot of content, a lot of interesting discussions about India coming up. Please stay tuned and remember that you can actually go to india-conference.com and click join session against the session that you want to watch at the time that it's going to start, and that's it. If you're registered as an India conference attendee, and if you're not registered, you even then you can do the same thing, go to the website and hit join session when the session is about to start. Thank you everybody again for joining. Good night to those in the US, and have a wonderful day for those in India. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.